The galactic black market was a sprawling, chaotic labyrinth of flashing neon lights and shadowy corners. Traders and buyers alike moved through the narrow, grimy pathways, their voices merging into a cacophony of deals, arguments, and bartering. Stalls displayed everything from alien technology to rare creatures in cages, their plaintive cries ignored by the bustling crowd. The air was thick with the stench of oil, decay, and desperation, a suffocating reminder of the market's ruthlessness. In the heart of this chaos, an auction was underway. The auctioneer, a grizzled creature with a rasping voice, banged a metal rod against the platform to silence the murmurs. "Next item," he announced, dragging a battered cage into view. Inside was a small, frail creature, a dragon no larger than a dog, with wings that hung limply at its sides. Its once lustrous scales were dull and cracked, and its golden eyes, though dim, held a flicker of defiance. The crowd reacted with disdainful laughter and murmurs of disinterest. "What's the point of a dragon that can't fly?" someone jeered. Another added, "Looks like it's on death's door." The auctioneer smirked, tapping the cage. "This rare specimen is what's left of a legendary species, once guardians of ancient worlds, now reduced to this, but perhaps you'll find some use for it. Starting bid, 50 credits. Silence. No one raised a hand. The traders shuffled uncomfortably, their attention drifting to more enticing items on display. The auctioneer sighed dramatically, trying to stir some interest. "A dragon is still a dragon, even if broken. Think of the prestige, the rarity." A quiet voice interrupted him. 50 credits. The crowd turned, eyes narrowing on the speaker. A young human girl stood at the edge of the gathering. Her simple utility suit and small satchel marked her as an outsider, a mechanic or scavenger, perhaps. Her dark hair was tied back haphazardly, and her expression was unreadable. The auctioneer raised an eyebrow. "You, girl? You're bidding?" "Yes," she said firmly, stepping closer. Her gaze remained fixed on the dragon. Its head lifted weakly, eyes locking onto hers for a brief moment before drooping again. Snickers rippled through the crowd. "Waste of credits," someone muttered. Another added, "She won't keep it alive for a day." "Any other bids?" the auctioneer called, though his tone was laced with mockery. No hands rose. "Sold." To the human girl, who clearly has no idea what she's doing. He shoved the cage toward her, his grin predatory. "Good luck with your investment." Lyra ignored the laughter and mutters as she took the cage. The dragon's breathing was shallow, its body trembling from exhaustion. For a moment she hesitated. The sheer fragility of the creature made her doubt her decision. But then its eyes flickered open, and she saw something. An ember of life, a silent plea. "I've got you now," she whispered, more to herself than the dragon. "You're not dying here. Not today." Lyra carefully set the cage down in the corner of her cramped ship. The soft hum of the engines filled the air as she crouched, unlocking the cage with steady hands. The dragon inside didn't move at first, its eyes barely open. Its body curled in on itself as though trying to disappear. She reached out slowly, her voice low and steady. "Hey, it's okay," she said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you." The dragon's head lifted slightly, a low growl rumbling in its throat. It was weak, but the warning was clear. Lyra didn't pull back. Instead, she opened the cage fully and sat cross-legged on the floor a few feet away, her hands resting on her knees. "You don't trust me yet. That's fine. I wouldn't trust me either," she murmured. "But I'm not like the ones who put you in that place." Minutes passed in silence, and the dragon finally uncurled enough to shift forward, its claws clicking against the metal floor. Lyra noted the sharp angles of its ribs, the unnatural way its wings dragged behind it. Her heart ached at the sight, but she forced herself to stay calm. The dragon stopped just inside the cage's edge, its golden eyes narrowing as it watched her. She reached into her bag, pulling out a small packet of nutrient paste. Tearing it open, she squeezed a portion onto her palm and held it out. "You need to eat," she said gently. "It's not much, but it'll help." The dragon hesitated, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the paste. After a long moment, it stretched its neck forward and licked cautiously at her hand. Lyra stayed still, letting it take its time. When the paste was gone, the dragon pulled back, watching her with less suspicion and more curiosity. "There you go," she whispered. "See? Not so bad." She grabbed a medkit from a nearby shelf and opened it, pulling out antiseptic and bandages. The dragon tensed, its growl returning, but Lyra held up a hand. "I need to clean your wounds. It'll sting a little, but it'll make you feel better. Trust me. Okay?" Moving slowly, she dabbed the antiseptic on a cloth and pressed it gently to the raw, inflamed patches of skin around its wings. The dragon flinched but didn't pull away. It watched her the entire time, its gaze sharp and assessing. Lyra worked carefully, wrapping the damaged wings with soft bandages. "You're stronger than you look," she said as she finished. "A lot of others would have given up by now." The dragon tilted its head slightly, as if considering her words. Lyra leaned back, giving it space, and let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I'm going to call you Kael," she said. "There was a story my dad used to tell me about a dragon named Kael. He saved an entire village from an army, even when everyone thought he was too small to fight. I think it suits you." Kael blinked at her, his body relaxing just a fraction. His wings gave a feeble twitch, the faintest sign of movement. Lyra smiled. "Rest now," she said. "We've got a long road ahead. But you're not alone anymore." The low hum of the ship's engines was suddenly interrupted by an alert, the console lighting up with warning signals. Lyra's heart sank as she hurried to the cockpit, glancing at the radar. 3 ships were closing in fast, their signatures uncomfortably familiar. "Mercenaries." She muttered a curse under her breath and activated the comms. Her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Unidentified vessels, you're entering private space. State your intentions." The response was immediate and laced with smug confidence. "You've got something that belongs to the black market. Hand it over and we'll let you go." Lyra's grip on the controls tightened. She glanced back at Kael, who was curled up in the corner of the ship. His eyes were open now, watching her intently, as if sensing the danger. "Not a chance," she said firmly, cutting the comms. The first laser blast rocked the ship, and Lyra sprang into action. She pushed the thrusters to full power, weaving through a nearby asteroid field in a desperate bid to escape. The mercenaries followed, their ships far more agile and well-armed. Kael let out a low, distressed growl as the ship jolted violently. Lyra glanced over her shoulder, her voice steady despite the chaos. "It's okay, Kael. Just hold on. I've got this." Another blast grazed the hull, and the warning lights on the console flared red. Lyra gritted her teeth, steering the ship into a dense cluster of asteroids. The mercenaries hesitated, giving her a brief window of time. But it wasn't enough. They regrouped quickly, firing again and again, her shields barely holding. A sharp, golden glow suddenly filled the cabin, and Lyra turned to see Kael standing unsteadily. His wings were still bandaged, but his body seemed to radiate a faint light. His eyes locked onto hers, and she felt a strange, reassuring warmth wash over her. "Kael," she whispered, her voice filled with both awe and concern. The glow intensified as he stretched his neck forward, letting out a low rumble that seemed to resonate with the very air around them. The next laser blast that should have hit the ship was deflected by an invisible barrier, the energy dissipating harmlessly into space. Lyra stared in shock, her hands frozen on the controls. Kael's glow dimmed slightly, but he held his ground, his gaze fierce. It was as if he'd tapped into some ancient, hidden power. The mercenaries, clearly startled, hesitated. Lyra seized the opportunity, veering sharply and diving deeper into the asteroid field. She maneuvered with precision, forcing the pursuing ships into tighter and more dangerous spaces. One of them clipped an asteroid and exploded in a burst of fire and debris. The remaining 2 ships pressed on, but their shots were less frequent now, their pilots clearly wary of whatever strange force had deflected their attack. Lyra's mind raced as she pushed the ship to its limits, searching for an escape route. Kael let out another low rumble, his glow flickering as if he were growing tired. Lyra knew he couldn't keep this up much longer. She spotted a narrow crevice in one of the larger asteroids and made a split-second decision, steering the ship into it. The mercenaries hesitated again, unwilling to risk following her into such a tight space. As the ship emerged on the other side, the radar showed the enemy vessels falling back. Lyra let out a shaky breath, her fingers trembling as she steadied the controls. Kael collapsed onto the floor, his glow fading completely. Lyra rushed to his side, gently cradling his head in her hands. His breathing was shallow, but his eyes fluttered open, meeting hers. "You saved us," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how, but you saved us." Kael let out a soft chirp, his eyes closing as exhaustion overtook him. Lyra stroked his head gently, her mind racing with questions. Whatever Kael had done, it was unlike anything she'd ever seen, and it was clear the mercenaries had underestimated him, just as she almost had. She glanced out at the vast expanse of space, her resolve hardening. If the black market wanted Kael, there had to be a reason, and she was determined to uncover it no matter the cost. Lyra sat cross-legged on the floor of the ship, watching as Kael slowly stretched one of his wings. The bandages had been removed days ago, leaving faint scars across the once-broken appendages. Though they weren't yet strong enough for full flight, the dragon was testing their limits, his determination clear. "You're getting there," Lyra said softly. "Just don't push too hard. Okay?" Kael flicked his tail, his golden eyes narrowing in concentration. He gave a small hop, flapping his wings awkwardly. For a moment he was airborne, just a foot off the ground, but it was enough to draw a delighted laugh from Lyra. Kael stumbled as he landed, but he chirped triumphantly, puffing out his chest. "Show off," Lyra teased, reaching out to scratch the base of his neck. Kael leaned into her touch, his eyes half closing in contentment. The ship's console beeped, breaking the moment. Lyra rose to her feet and checked the display. She had been digging through old star charts and archives, piecing together fragments of information about dragons. What she'd found was astonishing. Kael's species wasn't just rare, they were thought to be extinct, and they weren't merely creatures. They had been revered as guardians, protectors of ancient civilizations, wielding powers tied to the fabric of the universe itself. Lyra turned back to Kael, who was now perched on the edge of a storage crate, watching her intently. "You're the last of your kind," she said quietly, the weight of the realization settling over her. "Or at least the last anyone's seen in a long, long time." Kael tilted his head, as though he understood her words. "There's a lot we don't know about you," she continued, sitting back down. "But I think the black market did. They wouldn't have sent mercenaries after us if you were just some broken animal. You're special." Kael let out a soft rumble, his gaze steady. Lyra reached out and placed a hand on his scarred wing. "You saved me back there. I don't know how you did it, but I promise I'll figure it out. We'll figure it out together." Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Lyra worked tirelessly to upgrade the ship, scavenging parts from her limited supplies to improve its defenses and speed. Kael grew stronger with each passing day, his wings gaining more range of motion, his glow returning faintly at times. On the fourth day, Lyra stepped outside the ship to test a new sensor array. When she turned back, she froze, her breath catching. Kael was in the air, his wings carrying him in a slow, uneven arc above the ship. The sunlight caught on his scales, casting shimmering reflections across the barren asteroid surface. He landed with a clumsy thud, letting out an excited trill. "You did it," Lyra said, beaming as she ran toward him. "You really did it." She hugged his neck tightly, and Kael nuzzled her shoulder in return. That night, Lyra stared at the star charts spread across the console, her mind racing. "There has to be something out there," she murmured to herself. "A clue, a place, anything that can tell us more about you." Her finger traced a faint trail on the map, an uncharted sector with ancient ruins rumored to hold secrets from forgotten civilizations. Kael hopped onto the console, peering at the chart as though he shared her curiosity. Lyra smiled, ruffling his head. Guess that's where we're going next. Who knows? Maybe there are others like you waiting to be found. As she set the course, Lyra felt a strange sense of hope she hadn't known in years. The stars stretched out before them, endless and full of possibility. She glanced at Kael, who was curled up beside her, his tail draped over her lap. We've both been broken before, she said quietly. But together we're stronger. We'll figure this out, Kael. One step at a time. Kael let out a soft, contented chirp, his eyes closing as he drifted to sleep. Lyra leaned back in her seat, her gaze fixed on the stars. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she had a purpose, a journey, and she wasn't alone.